This is the second video in our number sense series, and specifically this video will be on tricks to find the sum of a sequence of numbers. So first we'll start with, what is a sequence? Well, essentially a sequence is a list of elements, but when we're talking about number sense, we're going to be dealing with a list of numbers. So that's essentially what a sequence is. And on number sense tests, usually there will be a pattern in these lists of numbers. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen a question on a number sense test where they want you to find the sum of a sequence that has no pattern, so like completely random. Generally, the questions they ask you, the sequences will be patterned. So for example, like add 2 to each term to get the next term, or something like that. So for example, examples of sequences can be really like anything. Like you could have 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus ... right? Like you can just continue on and then plus 100. Or you can have 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus 10. That's also a sequence. So sequences can range from a lot of different things, but like I said on number sense, there will be some pattern in the sequence. So obviously this first sequence here is just plus 1, and here we have plus 2. So that's kind of a basic overview of sequences, at least in the context that you will see on a number sense test. You may have learned about sequences from algebra or geometry, and in that case you might have learned formulas for finding the sum of an arithmetic sequence or a geometric sequence. And while these formulas work perfectly fine, number sense is all about speed and finding the most efficient and fastest way to solve questions. So instead of going about the typical route for finding the sum of a sequence, on a number sense test, we're really looking for kind of a shortcut for how to quickly find the sum of a sequence, because usually you'll be asked to compute the sum of maybe a long sequence, and maybe like at first glance it's gonna take a while, but on number sense you don't have that kind of time, right? So what we need to do is we need to learn some tricks to approach these questions in a faster way. So the basic trick we will use to find the sum of a sequence is going to be to find the middle term. So find the middle term and multiply by the number of terms. So that is the basic trick that we'll be using. So for example, if I have the sequence 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus 10, using this trick to find the sum of a series, we will first look for the middle term, which in this case is 6, and then we should count the number of terms. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then, using the trick, we can do the middle term, which is 6, times the number of terms, which is 5, and we get 30 as the sum of this sequence. And you can check this for yourself. It does match up. And so you can see that this is kind of a faster approach than your traditional approach using the arithmetic series formula or something like that. But important thing to note is that for this trick to do the middle term times the number of terms, each term in the series has to differ by a constant number. So like I said, in this case, we can see each term is increasing by 2, right? And because there's a constant pattern here, constant pattern of adding 2, we're able to use this trick. And so even if there is another pattern, like for example, like if we had 2 plus 4 plus 8 plus 16 plus 32, obviously there is a pattern here, right? We're multiplying by 2, but we can't use our middle term times the number of terms trick here, because for that trick we need to have it increase by a constant number, whereas here we're like adding 2, and then we're adding 4, and we're adding 8, and so it's not a constant increase, because rather it's multiplied by 2. So that's just something to look out for as to when and when you cannot use this trick. So just make sure it's increasing by a constant number. And so that's kind of the basic trick to find the sum of a sequence. Let's go through another example, because you might be wondering what we do when there's an even number of terms. So for example, let's look at the sequence 10 plus 14 plus 18 plus 22 plus 26 plus 30. So first we need to check if we're able to use our trick on this sequence, and we can see that each term is increasing by the constant 4, and so because of that we are able to use the trick because it's increasing by a constant number, or consistently adding 4. So then, now that we know we can use the trick, the next step is to find the middle term. And so you might be wondering, what are we going to use as the middle term, since this sequence has 6 numbers, and so there is no one middle term. Rather, we can look at the 2 middle terms. So 18 and 22 are the 2 middle terms. We don't just have one middle term because there's an even number of terms in this sequence. So instead, we look at the 2 middle terms and we average them. So the average of 18 and 22 is going to be 20. And so we're going to use 20 as the middle term. So then the next step would be to count the number of terms in the sequence, which we already kind of did, but if we want to look at that again, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we know the number of terms is 6. And so then we can use the trick, which is the number of terms times the middle term. And remember, in this case, the middle term is the average of the 2 middle terms. So it's 20. And so we can do 6 times 20. And we'll get 120 as the sum of this sequence. So before we move on, we can just do another example. So let's take the series 9 plus 12 plus 15 plus 18 plus 21. So first, remember, make sure that you can use this trick on the series, and we can see that we can because it's plus 3 between each term. And so then what we do is find the middle term. In this case, there's an odd number of terms, so we do have a middle term, which is 15, and the number of terms is going to be 5. So the sum would then be 15 times 5, which equals 75. And that is the sum of this series. So you can see this trick does make it quite a bit simpler to find the sum of a series. And whether you have an odd number of terms or even number of terms, it isn't really too complicated, and there's not really much of a difference between the two. Just make sure that if you do have an even number of terms, you're averaging the middle 2 terms. But overall, that's pretty much the basic trick. However, we can actually apply this trick to a number of different kinds of sequences. However, this will be covered in part 2, so please head on over to the next video to learn more about sequences and how to use this trick in more complicated applications.